to the destruction of the 3 World Trade Center towers in New York City on September 11, 2001, and a whole lot more. This is a 9/11 Freefall. Hello, everybody. I'm Bernie Suarez, and I'm here with Andrew Steele. That's right, coming to you on the internet and around the world via NoLinesRadio.org. You can type it in. We're also available on 911freefall.com, where you can tune in wherever you are, and you can go ahead and go right there and listen to any of our previous shows. Again, hello everybody. Welcome to 9/11 Freefall. This is a radio show committed to 9/11 truth. We are committed to the scientific evidence surrounding the events of 9/11. We are also committed, as I always say, to exposing the official story. That's right, of 9/11. That thing keeps falling apart, and it is nothing left to it. Here we are 11 years later, and we are also committed to bringing attention to scientific organizations and organizations that support 9/11 truth and focus on the facts and the science of 9/11, predominantly architects and engineers for 9/11 Truth. We talk about these guys all the time. You can check them out on ae911truth.org. This is an organization dedicated to the pursuit of academic truth with respect to the events of 9/11, in particular the destruction of the 3 World Trade Center towers. So, Andy, I am excited to be here today. We've got another exciting guest. Tell us, how are you, first of all? How's it going? And you got a lot of storms that you've had to endure, too.
Well, I'm here up in upstate New York, and, luckily for us, we only just got a little bit of wind and rain. It wasn't that big of a deal, but my heart goes out to the people out in New York who are, as of this recording, still waiting for power in some areas, so, God bless them. But in terms of my mood, my mood status never changes. It doesn't veer too far off from determined, from driven. And what we're doing here is we're providing a record for posterity, for future generations, so that they know that when the lie of 9/11, the lie of the official story of 9/11 was being maintained by this system, this media, this government system, that we weren't sitting here listening to our iPads. We were actually taking the bull by the horns and doing something about it, us and our audience. And you are part of this cause, this movement to get a real investigation, to get justice for those victims and their family members. I'm talking to the audience right now, and you can help us by spreading the show around, embed it in your blogs, and telling everybody about it, because we're getting bigger and stronger. Surely there's people out there who would like to see this show go away. Well, we're not going anywhere. We're just going to keep on trucking.
That's right. There you go. And we are going to keep on trucking. There's a lot of things going on in the world, Andy, as you know. But the truth of the matter is, you know what? I thought about this before today's show, and 9/11 Truth, I consider it the back door to all the truth surrounding all the events of the world right now. You could face the events that are going on now and ask yourself, why is this happening? Why is that happening? All these wars and torture and drones and all the stuff we mention every week here. However, 9/11 Truth is the back door to all that truth. If you really want to understand the origin of all the illegalities and loss of freedoms that are going on, easily 9/11 is the one big event that has had more impact on what's going on now than any other event, and that's one of the reasons why we do this show, Andy.
Well, yeah, and I boil it down even further. I even focus on Building 7, and I've got a new analogy. I call it the severed head on the floor of the debutante party. That helped us contribute to making this Twilight Zone society where things kind of just move on. It's almost like a Twilight Zone episode where only a small segment of the population is like that one sane person that's pointing out the obvious irregularity, while everybody else is just kind of going along, living the lie, protecting it because they're afraid. There was a lot of shows on the Twilight Zone like that. Well, we're in this Twilight Zone society now, and right now, Building 7 is like at a white glove party. You just watch somebody's head get chopped off, and everybody's just kind of stepping around it, not wanting to acknowledge it, wanting to keep the party going, not wanting to deal with the unfortunate reality in front of them. But you have the one person, and in this case it's several people across America who are speaking out, and they want that cleaned up, because we are not going to stand for this. We're not going to stand for the lies and everything that has come from it. And 9/11, Building 7, the obvious controlled demolition of that building is the core of it. It pulls the legs out from under all of the things that bother us right now as Americans. It's something that all people of all ideologies, right, left, whatever you want to believe in, can unite behind and affect real change by bringing attention to it.
Unbelievable, yes. And you mentioned Twilight Zone and this idea that people are just in their own zone. And for some reason, probably is because of today's guest, I'm reminded of, I may be mispronouncing his name, but Judge Edward Leaner, who once said, building what? When questioned about World Trade Center 7, not realizing that he was talking about a building that would constitute the largest building in 30 or more states, coming straight down to the ground. Building what? Not knowing what we're talking about. How can you not know of a building that big and be a judge? So that kind of Twilight Zone theme came to mind as you were saying that. And so we'll tie it all in to our this week's guest for sure in a few minutes. All right. Well, Andy, what we're going to do then for our audience, if you're listening in, thank you for tuning in to 9/11 Freefall. We are what we do. One of the things that we do every week, we take about 10 seconds, or I say about it. We count about 10 seconds of silence to remember the victims and the family members of the victims. And when I say victims on this show, I'm talking about all the victims, not only the approximate 3,000 people who died on 9/11, but also all the victims of 9/11, which is now almost everyone in this world right now with all the events going on. So, but we want to remember the victims, of course, that did die on that day, and we do that with a 10 seconds of silence. Therefore, we'll start that starting right now. Okay, and with that 10-second of silence, we just want to remind our audience that we do this to keep ourselves focused on why we do this. We could be doing a lot of other things, right, Andy? We could, we've got the football and sports and a lot of entertainment going on out there. We could be watching movies, right? No, just kidding. Well, we could be doing other things and be with our families, but instead, and the same thing goes for all the activists out there. A lot of people out there, and we have amazing guests one week after another here on this show, and these people have given up their lives to do this, and we could be doing other things, but this is so important, this issue, so we cannot do it unless we realize why we're doing it, and it's always good to remember those victims and our future generations and how big this issue is.
Well, you're absolutely right. I've written before about how 9/11, the tragedy of it is not only the people that died on that day and afterwards, but the number of lives and divisions in society that were created. And all of our lives were touched by that event in some way or another. Obviously, yours, Bernie, and mine were too. And, you give up something in pursuing this, but you also gain something. You gain knowledge, you gain a better understanding of your world, and you gain greater confidence, because if you can be honest with yourself enough to acknowledge this horrible truth, and if you can pick up the sword and the shield and fight for a cause like this one, it's a tough cause. No, I'm not going to deny that. It's a tough cause, but if you can do this, you gain something, and personally, spiritually, everything. And you become a stronger person, and that's the reason that we need more people, because it's making this country a better place. The more people that speak out, the more people that acknowledge this truth, the stronger this nation becomes, and the real spirit of America shines through.
There's no doubt about it. It's been said, you talk about the stages of accepting the truth. It's always that first group of people that realize what's going on that would have it harder. But as more and more people become aware of the evidence and what's, the truth of 9/11 and all the implications of that, more and more people learn about this, the easier it becomes for future generations, for other people to become awakened. It's much easier to become awakened to this issue when everybody around you is already awakened. So we're always it's a numbers game, people. That's what it is. And, we got to keep doing it. And I believe that every day more and more people are more aware of this information. I've said it many times, Andy. In my world, everywhere I go, a lot of people acknowledge the information. They realize the truth about a lot of the science, and some people just watch these other documentaries. They're talking about a lot of the other stuff that's not scientific, and a lot of that wakes them up. And we've talked about it periodically on this show. We don't get too much into it, but 9/11 is saturated with stories and claims that that are not true. Andy, I'm not afraid to say, this is, I've said it on this show. I always challenge anybody to prove any portion of the official story, right? And I won't promote my own site, but maybe our guest today can tell me what I can do legally, because we kind of jokingly offer cash reward for anybody who could prove any portion of the official story, so we won't go there. All right. So, all right, what do we have, Andy? What's going on in the 9/11 circle here? We've got, I know we had Rena Patty and Pam Senzi conclude their 9/11 Journey for Truth, and we've got Richard Gage recently speaking at the Global Social Responsibility Conference in St. Cloud State University in Minnesota. And we've had, we've briefly mentioned Ellen Mariani, who's one of the family members of one of the victims, and she's been active on her end, challenging, taking her case to the Supreme Court, as we understand, challenging the judgment that was handed down to her as far as her the airlines are concerned with her experience. So. Want to add?
Well, as far as I know, and I'm just kind of checking up with this as we speak right now, she was trying to raise some money to be able to do it by November the 1st. I'm not certain that she was able. And actually, as I go to her website right now, as she has managed to raise, well, pretty close. She got up to $13,440. She needed a... Well, actually, I apologize. It looks like she did reach the goal. Well, you're hearing that here first.
There you go.
Trying to keep up with the news here, but from what it looks like, on her site, she got over her needed $11,000 to do this. So we're going to keep you updated on that. But if you go to marianilawsuit.wordpress.com, you can see it for yourself. So yeah, keep your eye on that, folks.
There you go. One step at a time. So we'll definitely, as you said, and we'll keep an eye on that.
Well, you hear the news go from bad to good right in the mid-sentence there on the show.
That's right. We stand corrected. We actually have a full-on investigation of 9/11 going on before the show ends. Let's hold on. Maybe we don't need to do this show anymore. We'll wait for that one to happen. And we've mentioned it before, and there's also coming up. Well, in January of next year, there's this whole hearing in Malaysia of a war crimes tribunal going on, and there's a hearing for 9/11 Truth, of which we know that Richard Gage has been invited. So maybe we'll keep track of that.
Well, absolutely. It's another example of another government doing the job that our government should be doing, go down there in Malaysia, and Richard Gage will be a part of that. He'll be bringing his expert testimony, and he's traveling the world spreading this information and doing what he can.
That's right. Oh. In that case, we'll move on with our show. I do have a quick question of the week, and here it is, drum roll. And we're going to have to get some more music, Andy. We're going to get, maybe we can get some Twilight Zone music when we talk about these public officials who act like they've never seen this evidence, and maybe we could play it on there. Who knows? But we will play drums for this, maybe imaginary drums. Okay, the question of the week. How long will it take for there to be a legal breakthrough with 9/11 evidence? Now, I wanted to say at first 9/11 Truth, but I replaced that last section of it to say 9/11 True evidence. In other words, the evidence is the truth, people. So the question again reads, how long will it take for there to be a legal breakthrough with 9/11 evidence, the true evidence of 9/11. The evidence is there. This connects with our show today. What do you think, Andy?
Well, when you say true evidence, I just want to remind the audience, he's not talking about a cartoon that NIST created. He's talking about the actual hard evidence that the AE 9/11 Truth puts out. How long will it take? Well, that depends on our audience. You know, there's a certain segment of the population out there doing something, but you know, America is going to have to wake up. There's going to need to be more voices. Unfortunately, the way that our system works, our government doesn't respond unless unless it's scared. You have to make them hurt. You have to make them afraid. And I'm not talking about violence, because I know that some critic out there is going to take those words and misconstrue them as that. But you do need to make them afraid, if not for their, for their political lives, then for their legacy, how they're going to be remembered in history, how their children are going to think about them when they look up at them or look back at them as adults. Because we're making history right now, and they're making history with their lives and their protection of of the lie. So we need to remind them of that. So it's really going to depend on the audience out there and on the 300 million people that make up America.
I agree, Andy. Great answer. And my answer to that whole question is I believe that governments don't correct themselves. They don't like to admit, they take their position, and it remains that way until a new, fresh generation of people replaces those positions. And so I really believe that the answer lies in educating the young. By the young, I mean the young kids from school age, teenagers, college kids, and it is our responsibility to raise a generation of strong young Americans that are properly educated and that they do understand the difference between what they're being taught in school and versus what the truth is. And then from that young generation, leaders will arise. So it could be a while. Who knows? None of us know the future, but that just seems to me the most reasonable expectation for a solution. But we'll see. Okay, and speaking of leaders and people that are making a difference, that brings us to our guest this week. And I'm going to introduce him now. Our guest is incredible. He's done a lot of stuff. His name is Dennis McMahon, and he is a member of the New York and Massachusetts bars. In 2009, Dennis served as an attorney for the 9/11 family members in Burke versus McSweeney as part of the NYC CAN petition effort to have New York City voters decide whether New York City should have its own investigation into what really happened on 9/11. Dennis was instrumental in introducing the Building What campaign, which was later renamed Remember Building 7. In 2011, he helped coordinate part of the investigation. Part of the Investigate Building 7 conference held in West Hartford, Connecticut, which I did, by the way. I watched a lot of that, and that was an incredible conference. So Dennis currently serves as a member of David Ray Griffin's Consensus 9/11 Project and is a member of the writing team at Architects and Engineers for 9/11 Truth. Dennis McMahon, welcome to 9/11 Freefall. Thank you for coming on.
Thanks, guys, for having me.
You've done a lot of work. We're going to let you have the floor in a second here and put into perspective for us. Well, let's start from the beginning for the sake of our audience. We have an audience, a mixed audience. Who knows? Some people may not be familiar with 9/11 Truth, and many are. So give us a little walkthrough on how you got involved in the 9/11 Truth movement, and then we'll talk about a lot of the projects that you've been involved. So how did you get involved in 9/11 Truth?
Well, I was a little late to the party, actually. In early 2008, my girlfriend at the time turned me on to the movie Zeitgeist. I don't know if you guys have seen that, but I thought it was excellent. And that was my introduction. They had a segment on 9/11, and I thought it was very good. But it just kind of sat with me. I had been aware of where government was at, having in my college days investigated the John Kennedy assassination. I was up on the Robert Kennedy and Martin Luther King assassinations. I kind of had an idea what government was really about, but I didn't really do anything. And then in August of 2008, after a merger, my employer transferred us from the West Village, Greenwich Village, to the World Trade Center area, and there was something about the energy there that really started to get to me. And then on September 11, 2008, I heard about the 9/11 Truth protesters, including Alex Jones. I believe he was leading the fray, who were there at Ground Zero, and I decided to do a little investigating and soon discovered on the internet what 9/11 Truth was about. I was looking then to become somewhat of an activist, do a little something, and discovered New York City CAN, which was then the New York City Coalition for Accountability Now, which was then in the process of gathering signatures in an effort to present a referendum on the New York City ballot in the mayoral election of 2009 to see if New York City voters wanted their own investigation into what really happened on 9/11. And I did that for a while, and at the end of the summer I let Ted Walter know. Ted Walter was the New York City CAN executive director at the time. I believe he still is. And I let him know that I was a lawyer and said that if he needed any help in the future, to let me know. And a year went by, and then in September 2009, he called me to help with the pro se petition. They didn't have a lawyer representing them. They were challenging the New York City clerk's decision not to let the referendum get on the ballot because there weren't enough signatures. So they had started a lawsuit. They had to get it into court. And long story short, I had to become the attorney of record for that effort. And eventually we did in fact prove, the city conceded that we had enough signatures, but the city challenged the referendum on the basis that it was improper under the law that was in effect, the New York City Home Rule law. And that was pretty much what I had to argue against. Now, just a little background on that, if I may. The New York City Home Rule law ostensibly gives New York City voters a right to create a law if there are enough votes to do so. But in the history of the Home Rule law, there has been only one success, and that was the perfume magnate Lauder. I think his name is Ralph Lauder, the billionaire, and he was the one who got term limits imposed on elected New York City officials. But he had lots of money behind him. You know, we didn't have anything, and that was in fact the law that Mayor Bloomberg, had the New York City Council undo, so he could run again in 2009.
Wow, you've kind of. I was going to ask you about that later on in the show, and amazing, not knowing that you were going to tie it all in together. I was going to wait till the end of the show and ask you about that whole the idea that New Yorkers are now under this indefinite rule by this mayor of Bloomberg, who has a notorious record for just a lot of just his against freedom, and a lot of his positions are very unpopular. But we'll get into that later. But interestingly, essentially, this is it the Home Rule law? You're saying?
Yeah, that's the nomenclature that's used, and on the face of it, it gives voters the power to enact their own law, but in reality, it hasn't worked except in one case, and that case was undone by Bloomberg and the city council at his behest.
Okay, so we'll maybe touch on that later. Now, kind of going back, I know you've been involved in the NYC CAN effort and this whole legal battles, and we'll maybe analyze some of those in a minute. Now, so basically, well, kind of going back to what you said, so this rally in 2008, was that the year when they had everyone wearing the black shirts, the video that kind of everyone that are shown on the internet in New York City, the New York on September 11th?
2008, if memory serves, Alex Jones was leading it, and he was confronting Geraldo Rivera live, and it got filmed, and Geraldo Rivera turned away from his own camera but facing the cameras that were capturing the event, and gave the finger to Alex Jones and mocked them and being the scraggliest protesters he has ever encountered, or something like that. But to his credit, I mean, Geraldo Rivera, once we came out of, I did in fact handle the case before the court-appointed referee and then later in court. I'm not an election law attorney. I'm basically a tax law attorney. But New York City CAN had nobody. They were going to hire an expert in election law. And we went to his office and we had a meeting with him, and he said, "You can't win this. The petition cannot succeed, and if you want me to represent you, it's going to cost you $20,000, but you're going to lose." So we thought the money was better spent elsewhere, and so I did it pro bono, and I just went into court, and and I handled the case before the court-appointed referee, and then later in front of Judge Lehner, and you mentioned this, Bernie, it was in a give and take between him and me, and he said, "Well, why do we need a new investigation? The federal government investigated. Why do we have to investigate what's going on here?" And I said, "Well, there are a lot of unanswered questions." And he said, "Like what?" I said, "Like, why did Building 7 come down?" He goes, "Building what?" And that, at the moment, I didn't know what to make of that. But it took David Ray Griffin to zone in on that, and he said, "Here is an astute, experienced New York City Supreme Court judge." By the way, in New York State, Supreme Court is the trial court level. It's not like in the federal system. So it goes New York State, State Supreme Court, appellate division, and then Court of Appeals. That's the level. So that's a trial court level. It's not an actual Supreme Court as the U.S. Supreme Court. But he said, let's get this Building What campaign going and let people know about Building 7. So Ted Walter went ahead with New York City CAN after the petition effort was over, and he started making films, and we had some films air in New York City on Building 7, and they were very effective films. And Geraldo Rivera saw it, and then he brought in Tony Zambodi from Architects and Engineers for 9/11 Truth, and also Bob McIlvain, a 9/11 family member who sadly lost his son on 9/11. And they appeared on Geraldo's show, and I have to say, Geraldo, I thought was excellent. I thought the show was great. It was more than fair. He gave them time to speak. He was respectful, and you expected something to come out of that. And a little something came out of that. This is on Fox News, by the way, when Judge Napolitano agreed with Geraldo. But in America, as advertising will show you, you don't get your message out once and then it's gone. But that's what happened here. We don't know what happened. People have speculated that, the Fox News bigwigs or whoever controls them said, listen, Geraldo, Judge, enough of this. You had to say that's it. No more of this or you're gone. And they never raised the issue ever again. Whatever happened behind the scenes, we don't really know. But in America, if you want to get a point home, you got to drive that point home again and again and again and again. We had a little bit of light shed on it with those shows, but we didn't get the momentum going. But, maybe a million viewers saw those shows, and we like to think that we made an impact.
Right. For our listening audience, we are speaking with attorney Dennis McMahon, who's been involved in the 9/11 Truth Movement since 2008 and has helped dramatically in the effort of NYC CAN, an effort, New York City Coalition for Answers Now, or Accountability Now, and several other efforts, and we're discussing that right now. Okay, well, Dennis, so for the sake of our audience, the reason I asked the question earlier, so in 2008, when you got involved in 9/11 Truth, this video is very popular, is online, where people, there's at least, I believe it's the same time of the 2008, when Geraldo Rivera is essentially, as you said, scoffing the 9/11 truthers and, the whole giving them the finger and all that, and then turning around to his cameras and then mocking the truthers. So in fairness to Geraldo, on that day, when the victim's family member went on the show with with Tony Zambodi, with Tony Zambodi, Geraldo Rivera admitted they played the video of him mocking the truthers. So justice was served there, where Geraldo admitted that he was wrong at that time. So I
thought that was very big of him. Yes.
Exactly. So, in fairness, kind of full circle to go with that story, and it's interesting that was when you got involved with 9/11 Truth.
And I just want to interject, too. It was actually 2007 when Geraldo flipped off the truthers.
Oh, really?
Just for the sake of accuracy. But, yeah, no, and I remember that as well. And that actually inspired me to go down there in 2008 and, go every year afterwards. So, it's amazing. We both were inspired to action by generally the same things.
And a lesson to be learned, these actions that people do, whether it's Alex Jones with his his followers, or if you want to call it that, with the black T-shirts, investigate 9/11, or whether it's a bunch of truth seekers harassing Geraldo Rivera, people will remember these things. And just like our guest today, Dennis, that made you at least curious enough to say, hey, let me investigate this for myself, huh?
Yes, that was a big part of it.
That's a big part of it. So that's why we do what we do. And hopefully there's people listening to this show and saying, wait a minute, let me see what's going on with these guys. Let me see if I can prove Bernie, Andy, and Dennis wrong here. So please do, because the evidence is solid. It is established for years, and we're continuing to show on this show how the evidence, it has the proof for the evidence as all being laid down on record, in this case, a legal record. So, Dennis, back to your effort Okay, so then you get involved with the New York City, the CAN, NYC CAN effort. So I was reading some of the information that that you passed on to us, and I know Andy passed on some information about all of this. You go to the city then, and you needed some. I understand there was some 80,000 signatures.
Well, under the New York Home Rule law, you needed 30,000 valid signatures. The city initially conceded, and this was before I was aboard, 24,000, but we had a total of 80,000. Mm-hmm. Excuse me. And so it became, how do you prove that you got the 30,000? And this was a great effort. But what we had to do, according to the court-appointed referee, was essentially go to the Board of Elections and go through the rolls and show that the signatures we collected were in fact valid. And we inundated them with an indication that what they were saying was false. And they basically conceded, okay, you have the votes, but you don't have the substance of a home rule law that can be put to the voters. And that's what we had to argue. And essentially what they were saying was, this has already been investigated. You don't have the proper financing, and to be fair to the state, and to the city council, what happened was a lot of people who wanted to get something going were outraged by 9/11. They came up with this petition and they got people to sign it and stuff. But in my view, and hindsight is 20/20. When I signed it, I didn't realize that it was not properly vetted, but I would say at this point, it was not properly vetted by an election law expert. Let's put it that way, okay? Because once we took it to an election law expert, but this was well into the game, he said, you can't win with this. This is well beyond the scope of what the New York Home Rule is all about. And again, it's a steep hill to climb, even if you got everything perfect. Only one instance has ever succeeded, and we were essentially saying you got to investigate all of 9/11, and the petition not only included New York events, it also included the Pentagon event and the Pennsylvania event, sure. And so it was just overbroad. If I'm Judge Lerner sitting in that chair, I recognize that it's overbroad, but I say, you know what? Something needs to be done. Go ahead and put it on the ballot and let the city appeal it to the appellate level. But he was of the mind that we hadn't proven our case, and I'd say in a technical sense he was correct. But in the overall picture, we felt that New York City has been lied to, especially about Building 7. And there was an interesting interaction with the judge and the New York City Council Stephen Kitzinger. And the judge said to him, he said, well, listen, what about Building 7? We had introduced the whole thing about Building 7. He goes, what if they wanted to investigate why Building 7 came down? Would that be narrow enough? And the city council said that could succeed. He conceded that. He says, but that's not what this petition is all about. The petition was overly broad in terms of investigating events in Pennsylvania, Shanksville, Pennsylvania, and at the Pentagon. So I think that was one of the main reasons why it failed.
I see.
Now, I got a question here. Now, one time I was at a speech by Sander Hicks, or he was also involved in this effort, and he said that there was a question about funding that was raised by the judge in terms of how are you going to pay for that? Is that something that was brought up in this? That was
indeed one of the issues. I don't have the brief in front of me, and it's been three years now. But yes, funding was an issue, and the funding that we were going to provide was through charitable contributions. There were some people standing by that if we succeeded, they were going to step forth with money to help this investigation get started. But Judge Lerner made a good point. He said, well, then what do you need the city for? But what we needed the city for is we wanted it to be an official investigation with subpoena power, but he wasn't going to give us that.
Well, what amazes me about that, though, is they're treating this like you guys are trying to put on a fireworks show or something instead of investigating the mass murder of nearly 3,000 New Yorkers that day. And I just think I find that kind of strange, and I'm not a lawyer, I'm not in the system, I'm just an observer on the outside looking in, but it just seems really strange to me that, that you have to account for go to charitable organizations to have a real investigation into like the biggest mass murder in New York's history. So I just wanted to get that comment in there and get that on the record as well.
Yeah, I appreciate that point, but just playing devil's advocate against my own position here, I mean, that's a case for the district attorney. You're talking about mass murder on New York City soil. That's the Manhattan District Attorney's jurisdiction. Robert Morgenthau, who was a district attorney for, 50 years or something, he didn't do a thing. And then Cy Vance was the district attorney and is the district attorney now. We petitioned him. We tried to get him to listen to it. He doesn't even answer us. But, and I could never be, but if I were district attorney, I go after this just the way Jim Garrison went after the JFK conspiracy in New Orleans.
Right, and I want to throw in, okay, so I'm hearing that they used different deflections on the issue, saying, please prove that these 80,000 signatures are real, or however, you need to prove that the signature is real. Then they say the case is too broad, which you see where it's some legitimacy there. I can understand that if you're dealing with a different state, and several different other parts of the country, and you're not dealing with a New York City issue. But then now you have district attorneys ignoring. Now, is there any way, as an attorney, is there anything in the law that citizens can do or other attorneys to obligate these DAs to act on this information or be subject to some sort of penalty?
I am not aware of anything. I mean, it's completely within the district attorney's discretion at what he wants to investigate, what crimes he wants to prosecute. As far as I know, maybe there's somebody out there versed in criminal law that says, if the crime goes down, that's obvious, the district attorney must pursue that, and we could bring an action to bear against him. I am not aware of any such action.
How about citizens?
Citizens, if enough citizens sent letters, and we did have a campaign, in fact, New York City CAN had a whole campaign citizens sending letters to the district attorney. He ignored us.
Okay.
We have no teeth with that. He wants to ignore us, he ignores us. I mean, that's about the size of it.
And I just want to ask Dennis really quickly here. Now, they said you might have a case with Building 7. What's to keep the NYC CAN organization from just rebooting the whole project, starting from scratch, and just doing it with a focus just on Building 7?
I think it could be done. I think it could be done. I haven't heard anybody express an interest in that. I haven't talked to Ted Walter about that specifically. At the time, he felt that he wanted to get into the whole PR aspect of the campaign. He thought that was the way to go. Again, with the history of the Home Rule Law being so unsuccessful, except in one situation, could the Building 7 petition there is an issue here. They're saying that office fires, NIST, the National Institute for Standards and Technology, saying office fires were the cause of Building 7's collapse, which is just, if you visit the Architects and Engineers for 9/11 Truth website, you can see how patently absurd that claim is. But are you going to get somebody to really investigate that? I mean, look who you're locking horns with. I mean, from a perspective of the city council or even the DA, we don't even know what powers were behind this. I mean, obviously, to me at least, the Bush administration covered it up. But who really did it? I don't really know. But you're talking about probably the greatest powers the earth has ever known. To pull something of this magnitude off in broad daylight, in plain sight, is just like astounding. And, are a little city councilman going to want to go up against that? I don't know. I tend to doubt it. We had some success visiting. New York City CAN did. I didn't personally, but the reports came back. We had some success visiting the New York City Council members. They were very receptive. They were very empathetic. They were very respectful. But were they going to stick their necks out and go about doing something? No.
Unbelievable. It just seems one thing after another, one way of censoring the truth after another, and you have been on the receiving end or right in the front lines of some of these battles. So it's good for our audience to hear this. A lot of people are not aware of the details of the legal battle here with this case in New York Now, you're saying, for our audience and for my sake, just to kind of hear it again, the home rule law, you said, has only been successful one time, and the one time that it was successful was in creating the term limitations on the mayoral position?
Not the mayoral position, all elected New York City officials.
All positions.
Including the mayor.
I see. Now, and so was that one issue of traction that you had to deal with then? Because it's been successful only one time, I would have thought that because it has been successful at least once, that would be a strength, but it turned out not to be, huh?
No, I mean, it's kind of like in baseball. If you go 1 for 15, you're not really hitting very well,
Well, I know in law it kind of goes both ways. I don't know. They play with these words and all that. Well, it's been successful once, then But that is interesting because that turns out to be another way of the establishment blocking the truth in the city where this crime was committed. So it's good for our audience to see that. And I don't know. I was listening to some of Graham McQueen's presentation on how he talked about evidence-based knowledge and action-based foreknowledge. How about the testimonies of the firefighters? Has that come into play? The whole issue of foreknowledge, has that been presented to the city level, Manhattan DA, or anyone?
The issue of foreknowledge was not part of the whole petition effort. Interestingly, though, I did mention, and you mentioned in the introduction, thank you, that I'm on the Architects and Engineers writing team. That's my latest article. It's going to come out in the next issue, I believe. I've already submitted my draft. But there are many factors indicating the possibility of foreknowledge of Building 7's collapse. There's Silverstein's Pullet statement on PBS. There's the certainty of Building 7's impending collapse as expressed and memorialized in the fire department oral histories, New York City Fire Department. There are the early announcements made by the FDNY, the precise nature of the early announcements saying Building 7 is going to come down. And then, to me, most telling, being a student of media, is the CNN and the BBC prematurely reporting Building 7's collapse. This says to me that people released the press release too soon. They were expecting Building 7 to come down earlier. And, one of these factors clearly raises a suspicion. But collectively, I mean, it's just about undeniable that people had foreknowledge that Building 7 was going to come down. Where did that foreknowledge come from? Where did it originate?
Exactly.
Who knew? Inside people had to be the source, ultimately, of the foreknowledge that was being expressed by others.
Absolutely, and from a criminal investigation standpoint, and you correct me if I'm wrong, I mean, you're the attorney, I would just think that overwhelming evidence of foreknowledge would weigh in very, very heavily, as you pointed out. That is just incredible how it was NIST who said, NIST, National Institute of Standards and Technology, regarding Building 7, he said, quote, this was the first known instance of total collapse of a tall building primarily due to fire, end quote. The history was clear that there was no logical way to predict or even anticipate that these buildings would come down like this, yet they did, and people knew about this. Firefighters, there's video everywhere of foreknowledge. It's crystal clear. So I wonder, has that been considered just legal action based on the foreknowledge?
Well, I don't know who you'd bring that legal action against. You see, that's the problem here. I mean, the people who should be doing their job, the Manhattan DA, number one, in my opinion. The New York City Council, number two, in my opinion. Congress, this corrupt Congress that's waging these wars in the Middle East, these illegal wars of imperialism throughout the world, constantly. They're not doing anything. I mean, and you can't expect them to do anything because they're pretty much on the side of the people who brought this event about, either de facto or at least by not doing anything. They're on the same team. And, I don't know to whom you turn to get an objective investigation going. And I've raised this point with Architects and Engineers because in his presentation, Richard Gage, whom I respect immensely, nobody has done more than him. He and David Ray Griffin are at the forefront of all this. They're just great. But to call for an investigation, by whom? You know, we're not a member of the World Court. Who's going to do this investigation? You know, I don't know where you turn. But I do feel that it is important to do what you guys are doing, to keep this issue alive, to educate as many people as you can as to what really happened on 9/11 as far as we can tell. It's important from a human standpoint to know who you are and where you are and when you're being lied to by the powers that be. And that's all great stuff. Whether or not we get an investigation into this, whether it becomes just like the John Kennedy assassination, everybody knew what was really going on, but nothing really happened. That's okay.
Well, let me ask you. You bring up John F. Kennedy and, of course, all the assassinations in the 60s and what America knows about these events now. And as you observe what's happening with 9/11, how do you compare 9/11 with JFK, or is there a way of comparing the two in terms of getting the public involved? I know you had what's the attorney that followed through with the Harrison or with the John F. Kennedy assassination.
That was Jim Garrison with the John Kennedy assassination. It's William Pepper with the Robert F. Kennedy assassination and William Pepper with the Martin Luther King assassination. He proved in a civil trial in I think it was 59 minutes, the jury came back and said, yes, there was a conspiracy to assassinate Martin Luther King that was participated in by members of the Memphis Police and the U.S. federal government. That's a historical fact. But no one knows about it because it gets no media play, because it goes against what they want us to believe.
Where do you see, how do you compare the events, and do you see more progress with the 9/11 truth demand for an investigation and for justice? Do you see it more happening with 9/11 than some of these other previous state crimes?
Well, when I was in college, I investigated the John Kennedy assassination. You know, I had to trek down to the main branch of the Brooklyn Public Library to do my research. I think what's great now is that we have the internet and that people can see these films for themselves. They can see the collapse of Building 7 into its own footprint. They can read about the free fall, the admitted free fall by NIST. That can't happen without explosives or something bringing out the foundations underneath. You can't have that. Whenever you have a situation where the government is essentially relying on the absence of the law of physics, like they did with the single bullet theory in the John Kennedy assassination, like they did with the Robert Kennedy assassination, the L.A. coroner testified quite frankly and blatantly that the fatal bullet came from 1 inch behind Robert Kennedy's head. Nobody put Sirhan in behind Robert Kennedy. These things are just going on, and really, to me, you asked me to compare these things, I would say there are 3 key elements to understanding America that you never see discussed fairly in the mass media, including most alternative media. That's 9/11, as we've been discussing it here, assassinations, as we've touched on a little bit here, and what we've not touched on is the rigged electronic voting. There is no paper trail. There's no way to understand how people voted. There's no way to really legitimately count the votes. Democracy is gone. Democracy is gone. We are really living in a fascist state disguised as a democracy.
There's no, I definitely agree with you, and you bring up the election issue at a time when we are in an election week, and that is certainly a big issue. I agree. We can talk about that for hours right now, but we're limited in time. We go back to 9/11 and the whole thing, the condition of the world is really suffering right now because of that false flag event. So we're talking about all this censorship at all these different levels. What are your thoughts on the, you mentioned something a few minutes ago about your, perhaps an international effort might be the answer, or you alluded to that a little bit. Let's talk about that. There was the Toronto hearings a couple of years ago. There's, we mentioned earlier, a war crimes tribunal taking place in Malaysia, or that government, and that is including a 9/11 truth hearing just on the evidence, and I know Richard Gage is part of that. Are you familiar with that effort, and what are your thoughts about that?
Actually, I was not familiar with the Malaysia effort. It's news to me. You're giving that to me now, so thank you for that. And, you know, if Richard Gage gets there and presents his evidence, I'd like to see what the reaction is for sure.
Oh, well, yeah. We just learned about this a few weeks ago. There's a hearing in Malaysia. It's January 22nd. Coming up next year, and they're continuing. Well, they had a hearing. Some of this stuff has been going on for a while now, and they had some sort of hearings earlier this year where they essentially announced that Bush and Blair were guilty of war crimes. So they're apparently moving forward with these tribunals and sentencing. So we'll definitely keep an eye on that. You think that any solutions can arise at the international court level?
Well, they can state their findings, and you know, if it gets some media publicity here, that'd be great for America. You know, I think inside America we are really at the mercy of the mass media. You know, the New York Times, which I pretty much despise for its national and international politics, it's just basically, to me, a CIA front. I mean, if Malaysia, if things come out of Malaysia and they find Bush and Blair guilty of war crimes, I'm guessing the New York Times wouldn't even report it. You know, will America ever wake up? I don't know, but it shows like this that keep, you make a few people aware, and then they make a few people aware, and it spreads. I think it's important to keep doing this, and keep an eye on that Malaysia hearing, and hopefully it'll get some coverage on the other alternative sites. That would be great.
Wow, that's true. Now, do you think that a case has been, in terms of the legal track work, or if you want to call it as far as leaving a record under oath of the evidence of 9/11, do you think that the Truth Movement has made its case on paper, legally speaking?
Well, no one has really put it together. I mean, I am part of, as you mentioned in the intro, part of David Ray Griffin's Consensus 9/11 panel.
Yeah, tell us about that. You want to tell us about that effort?
Yeah, it's a panel. I was asked to join that. I had some contact with David Ray Griffin when the New York City CAN legal action was going down. We asked him for some advice, and he thankfully provided it. And then I had some contact with him later on. I reviewed a couple of his books on Amazon and that kind of thing. And we had some emails going back and forth. And then he came up with this 9/11 consensus panel. And the purpose of the panel is essentially to provide the world with a clear statement based on independent opinion of some of the best evidence opposing the official narrative about 9/11. And he's collected that. And the goal essentially is to, if let's say that Cy Vance or the next Manhattan DA woke up and said, hey, we got to do something about this, the evidence is going to be there. It's a ready source of evidence-based research. And so any investigator that may undertake, an effort to try to bring about the truth, the evidence is there. It's not presented formally in terms of on the oath, obviously, it's just a website. But it's gotten some play in the media. It's gotten some play around the world. It's in a couple of 3 languages. And so, the truth, like you guys are doing, is out there. It's out there for people to see. But if you want to visit the website, it's consensus911.org, and you can see about the evidence that we voted on as some of the best evidence indicating that we have been lied to about 9/11.
Right, absolutely. For our audience, again, you can check out consensus911.org. Absolutely. Well, you know what? It was also David Ray Griffin. I've read this before on the show, and it's worth reading right now. Again, David Ray Griffin said, quote, one time he said, quote, there are several ways to challenge a theory. You can cast doubts on it by showing that its alleged evidence does not stand up to scrutiny. You can show that a theory is probably false by pointing to evidence that apparently contradicts it, or you can positively disprove a theory by providing evidence showing that it cannot possibly be true. The 9/11 Truth Movement has done all 3 with regard to the official account, end quote. So, and nothing could be more true than what he's saying. It seems like the 9/11 Truth Movement has done its job, at least primarily in terms of laying out the evidence. And certainly consensus911.org is another way that is happening, as well as this show, all the work that you've done, Dennis, for sure. So in my opinion, it seems like educating the young people, college students, the kids now and teenagers, as well as young adults all the way through, and continuing this awareness is the only way to go. And it seems like you do agree with that. And, I know I already asked you that, but I hope that the framework is being laid out for there to be justice someday, a little quicker than some of these other cases that we talked about back in the 60s, assassinations and all that.
Yeah, I would hope so. But again, it's important to know the truth. Even if your own circle knows the truth, I think that's very important. Even if you could prevent one family member from, say, joining the United States Army, because look what you're supporting when you do that. I mean, people have this kind of high attitude towards America. America's the good guy, John Wayne, all that jazz. It isn't really that way if you look deep into it. In terms of what activists might do, I mean, we touched on this offline a little bit. I try to be a little bit active at least and stay a little bit active. So, with the David Ray Griffin thing, I've done my part there. I don't know if there's going to be more to do in the future, but I would suggest that people check out Architects and Engineers for 9/11 Truth. There are many, many ways to volunteer. They have action group teams, college outreach teams, fundraising teams, presenter teams, the writing team, which I'm on. Many, many teams. So if you're looking to do something, you say, hey, I want to do something about this, and that's great. I respect that highly. Check out Architects and Engineers for 9/11 Truth.
Exactly, and that's what we tell our audience all the time. So, Dennis, all the work that you've done, we want to thank you for everything you've done. I think what it is, we all lay down our work, and we choose how we're going to move forward. But for certainly, the work that you have done is historic, and you will be vindicated on all the work you've done. I believe that there's a young generation of people that are looking at the work that's been laid out, and all of that effort with NYC CAN, that is forever in the record books. For sure, with all the evidence and all the work that people like yourself have done. I want to thank you for that. And I also want to thank you for coming on this show today. And we're all out of time. Dennis McMahon, an attorney involved in all kinds of ways for several years now, very instrumental in the NYC CAN effort, and the Remember Building 7 campaign, and a lot more. So we do thank him for being with us today. And that's it, people. This is the end of the show for this week. This is Bernie Suarez here on behalf of Andy Steele, and you're listening to 9/11 Free Fall. Remember to check us out on No Lines Radio every Thursday night at 7 p.m. Pacific and 10 p.m. Eastern. Again, on NoLinesRadio.org, and you can check out any of our shows on 911freefall.com, going back to our early shows right there. And with that, we let you go. Take care, everybody. Good night, and goodbye.